Well, let me thank you all for being here today so that we can make it very, very clear that Vladimir Kara-Murza has not been forgotten. We stand with him, and we want the whole world to know about his courage and that he is not alone. Eugenia, I want you to know we appreciate you being here. We recognize that your courage through this, you've been a tower of strength for all of us, and we want everyone to understand that. While this program is going on, there's a station over there where we're writing letters to Vladimir. We encourage you all to participate in this, for you see, part of the cruelty of Russia today under Mr. Putin is to deny Vladimir the opportunity to communicate in a normal way. So this is the way that we can keep in touch with him and to let him know that he is not alone. Vladimir is my friend. We've met many times. He is a champion for human rights, and that's been his calling. He helped us to deal with the aftermath of the tragedy of Sergei Magnitsky. And together, working, we were able to pass legislation that put a sanction and penalty on those who commit these gross violations of human rights, the Magnitsky sanctions. Vladimir Kara-Murza was one of our champions in developing that legislation and helping us to get that passed. He is my friend, and he was arrested. It'll be 2 years this Thursday on trumped-up charges for speaking for human rights for the people of Russia. Sentenced to 25 years in prison, brutally being treated in the Putin Russian prison system, being denied normal access, being cut off from communications. But he has not given up, and he will not give up. He will not give up because of his love for Russia. We know that in the kleptocratic authoritarian regime that Mr. Putin has established today for Russia, that there's been a shutdown of the independent media, and they've jailed journalists. We know that, and so many that have been journalized. There's thousands of people in prison today because of political speech. There's reporters that are in prison. There are other American citizens that are imprisoned. So we speak out not only for Vladimir Kara-Murza, but for all those that are being imprisoned today for speaking truth to the Putin government. I want to thank you all for being here. Your presence is so important to make it clear that he will never be forgotten. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Coons, who's with us today from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We have other members here who are going to be speaking. I want to thank all of the host organizations that put this together. The bottom line is that Vladimir Kara-Murza will not be forgotten. We are going to work to set him free, to set Russia free, for elections to be held in a democratic way, and for a peaceful Russia. Your presence here today makes that much more likely to occur. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to his incredible wife, who stood by him and represents the same passion for freedom for the Russian people, Eugenia.
Dear all, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event. There's so many people who came together to make this happen. It shows me how many friends and allies Vladimir has around the world and in the US Capitol, and it warms my heart to know that so many of you are standing with me. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me here today, and for joining me in my fight, for standing with me in my continuous fight, not just for Vladimir's freedom, but truly for his life. The brazen, vile murder of Alexei Navalny has recently demonstrated how urgent that fight is. Just like Vladimir spent the last 15 years of his life trying to warn the international community of the danger the Putin regime represents for the free world, I've spent the last 2 years of mine trying to convince decision makers around the world that my husband's life was in danger. Oh, I would hear. The regime would not dare. People like Alexei Navalny or Vladimir Kara-Murza are too high profile. Well, so was Boris Nemtsov, shot in the back on the Bolshoy-Moskvoretsky Bridge in 2015. And on the day when finally, 22 months after Vladimir's arrest, I was meeting UK British Foreign Secretary Cameron in London, Alexei Navalny was being laid to rest in Moscow. And in my mind and in my heart, I was back home with those thousands and thousands of my compatriots who went out to lay flowers to yet another slain opposition leader. I'm often asked if there is an alternative to Vladimir Putin. Well, you're watching Vladimir Putin using the powerful Soviet-style repressive machine to try and destroy that alternative right before your eyes. The regime targets the most courageous, the most principled, those Russians who risk not only their freedom, but very often their lives, to show you that Russia can be different. Hundreds and hundreds of brave people ended up behind bars because their human integrity did not allow them to stay silent in the face of the many atrocities committed by the Russian state. They are the alternative, as are my incredibly committed and intrepid colleagues from the Free Russia Foundation, Memorial, OVD Info, Association Russie Liberté, the Anti-War Committee, and many other Russian civil society groups and organizations working tirelessly to bring closer the day when the regime in the Kremlin collapses. Those who are opposing Vladimir Putin's murderous regime today represent that Russia that Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny fought and died for. If Putin is allowed to destroy that vision of Russia, the free world will be left with no other option but to deal with this decrepit, vile dictator and him alone. So I urge you to stand with those who oppose the regime today, both inside and outside of the country. Send them a message of solidarity. Support their work if you want to see Russia become a democracy one day, which will be the only guarantee of the peace and stability on that continent. As my husband put it, and I quote, "It is my hope that when people in the free world today think and speak about Russia, they will remember not only the war criminals who are sitting in the Kremlin, but also those who are standing up to them, because we are Russians too." End of quote. Bukovsky, Ginsburg, Kuznetsov, Orlov, Sharansky, Solzhenitsyn, Dremluga were freed and survived thanks to the personal advocacy of the US presidents of both parties. The Levinson Act that today determines a person's eligibility for the advocacy by the US government did not exist back then. And these Soviet dissidents were not US citizens. In fact, they were citizens of no other country but the Soviet Union. They were freedom fighters. And for that reason alone, this great country believed it important to stand with them and fight for their lives. And that was a powerful message addressed both to the Soviet dissident movement and to Soviet leaders that the United States had no doubt about who the real criminals were and who was persecuted and wrongfully detained. As Secretary of State George Shultz wrote to President Reagan after ensuring that a group of religious dissenters was allowed to leave the Soviet Union in 1983, and I quote, "Giving freedom to a human being is a gift of great wonderment." End of quote. And I call on the United States to continue this country's long-standing and noble tradition of helping free Russian prisoners of conscience and of supporting those Russians who are fighting for freedom and democracy in our country. Thank you all very much.
Eugenia. Eugenia, I want you and your family to know we will not rest until Vladimir Kara-Murza is home safe with his family. We are committed to keep a spotlight on this and to make sure the right thing is done and he's returned safely to his family. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for everything that you do. And we want you to know, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I have called upon Secretary of State Blinken to designate Vladimir as a wrongfully detained status under the Robert Levinson Act. We think that would put a more direct attention on this and make it a priority for the United States in our conversations with the Russian Federation. So we want you to know we're solidly behind you. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to one of the real champions on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and by the way, also on the Appropriations Committee, since he controls the purse strings of foreign aid in the appropriation process, but Senator Chris Coons of Delaware.
Eugenia, thank you for your strength, for your courage, for your persistence. I know that you and your children are the jewels of Vladimir's life. You are the treasures that anchor him, and all of us are here to witness to the determination and the strength that is required, knowing what he was risking, that he continued to advocate, that he continued to stand up, that he continued to speak out for this vision of a democratic Russia. The United States has an enduring difference with Vladimir Putin. He has committed war crimes in Ukraine. He has undermined the governments of so many other countries. But within the Russian Federation, within his own nation, the sorts of crimes he has committed that you have called out so clearly, the bald murder of Boris Nemtsov, the recent and horrific killing of Alexei Navalny that has shocked the world's conscience, and now the beginning of a third year of imprisonment of Vladimir. I first met Vladimir Kara-Murza through a friend and mentor here in the Senate, John McCain, who knew a thing or two about being imprisoned, who knew a thing or two about advocating for freedom and for those who stand up for freedom. I'm the co-chair of the Human Rights Caucus here in the Senate, and I just wanted to join Chairman Cardin in saying that we have to do everything we possibly can to urge the designation of Vladimir Kara-Murza as unjustly detained, to elevate your story and his story, to bring attention to it and focus to it, and to make it blindingly clear that he is not forgotten and that you will not be forgotten. The Russian people have an incredible culture, a great depth, a great character, and a great capability. And they are not just ill-served by the dictator who sits in the Kremlin today. He is distorting the very nature of the Russian people. And you bravely hold up that possibility of a different future and of a different path. That is what both you and Vladimir are fighting for, and we are so grateful for your witness, your strength, and your determination, and we look forward to standing with you when we welcome Vladimir back to freedom. Thank you, and God bless you.
Let me invite you to be seated. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the president and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. We were the first organization to be designated undesirable by the Russian Federation because of our support for democracy and human rights in over 100 countries throughout the world, including Russia. That was a very powerful start to this program. Eugenia, thank you so much. You hear her voice. You hear how she represents the cause of Vladimir and so many political prisoners around the world, in Russia in particular. You didn't ask for this. You have rose to the occasion to be a voice for so many. And I think we all here, our friends of Vladimir, need to remember that this is first and foremost a tragedy for you, for your family, for your children. And it's an honor to be with you, Eugenia, to be joined by Sophia Donik. Thank you for being here. I want to express my sincere thanks to Senator Cardin and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We've just heard from Senator Cardin, Senator Coons. Thank you to the committee for hosting this event. They have been powerful voices in support of Vladimir Kara-Murza and hundreds of others that have been imprisoned by the Kremlin. The members of Congress who are here today and will be joining us throughout this program, their support is more critical than ever right now. I also want to thank all of the participating organizations that helped make today possible in planning this event, especially the Free Russia Foundation, which continues the tireless fight to defend Vladimir and advance Russia's pro-democracy movement. Natalia, thank you. You heard Senator Cardin say at the top, Vladimir Kara-Murza could not be silenced. He has a powerful voice. Even from behind bars, we hear his voice today. He's a prolific writer. We invite all of you who are here to join us over here in the corner and writing your own message, sending your own message to Vladimir, which serves as a source of inspiration for those behind bars. And thank you for the committee for making this possible. So today marks 2 years of the unjust imprisonment of our friend and democracy champion, Vladimir Kara-Murza. And a year ago, many of us joined on Capitol Hill for a comparable moment to rally in support of his freedom. And it can feel a bit disheartening to be here a year later, and yet we look around and we know this coalition is stronger, Vladimir is alive, hope endures, and there is a power there. Before we continue through the program, Vladimir was a friend of many of ours. Natalia Arnaud and I, with Miriam Landskog, who's here, we had lunch with Vladimir on his last day in the United States before he was headed to Dulles Airport to fly back to Europe and then onward to Russia. A casual lunch outside under a beautiful day in Washington at Elephant and Castle. And we asked Vladimir, why? Why are you going home? We were very concerned. He knew that it was important to speak for and to save the dignity of a nation, to save the dignity of the Russian people. He talked about how he was inspired by Russian dissidents. He talked about the 7 Russian dissidents that went to Red Square when the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia to protest the Soviet invasion. 7 people, prominently covered by Czech media, saving the dignity of the Russian people, whether it's Vladimir Kara-Murza, whether it's the 40,000 Russians that turned out to mourn Alexei Navalny, the 8 million that watched the live stream of the funeral, the thousands of Russians that contributed $34 million rubles to the cause of political prisoners despite the risk, the tens of thousands of Russians that tried to get in line to register anti-war candidates, the 600 political prisoners according to Memorial, the 19,855 anti-war activists that have been detained, the 934 in criminal proceedings. They are saving the dignity of a nation, underscoring that Russia can be free, it is possible, and it is the future. So that's why we gather today. And with that, I think we've had Senator Wicker join us. I'm going to invite Senator Wicker to come forward as a ranking member of the Helsinki Commission, Senate Armed Services Committee, has been an incredibly outspoken voice, a champion for Vladimir, for those who have been detained in Russia. Senator, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And I can't tell you what it means to see this packed room. Thank you all for taking the time to come over here and by your presence expressing support for what we say today and what I will say this afternoon on the floor of the United States Senate. I can't remember how long I've known Vladimir Kara-Murza, but we first met when he and his client, Boris Nemtsov, would come to see us. And it's a trip down memory lane with regard to Boris and Vladimir. Both statesmen, both freedom fighters, both courageous. And I guess even I, as disdainful and suspicious and contemptuous as I am of the Putin leadership in Russia, could not have imagined that it would come to this. I really did not believe that the leadership in Russia would have Boris Nemtsov shot in the shadows, virtually, of the Kremlin there in the center of Moscow. And it's hard to believe, after the survival of 2 poisonings and the public disdain and contempt that has been visited on the Russian regime because of that, that they would have the audacity simply to imprison someone simply for expressing an opinion. It happens that that opinion is the truth. And Vladimir Kara-Murza went back to Moscow, went back to Russia to tell the truth. But in this country, and really under the law of nature and nature's God, we have a right to express our opinions, whether they're correct or whether they're totally wrong. We have that freedom of speech as citizens of the world. And someday, Eugenia, I do believe and hope that someday that right to speak out and to breathe free and express freely will be recognized around the world, even in the darkest corners of today's Putin's Russia. So I am honored, deeply humbled to be a friend of Vladimir Kara-Murza and to be called upon to say a word or two. I do believe we'll be asking some things of the administration later on this afternoon, and I hope my colleagues, some of whom are in the room, will be joining us in that. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Senator Wicker, thank you for your leadership, for those words. I now want to invite Senator Whitehouse to join us. Senator Whitehouse has been a champion of these causes. Recently heard him speaking to them as a leader of the Congressional delegation of the Munich Security Conference, the chair of the Budget, senior member of Judiciary and Finance. Senator Whitehouse, please.
Well, it's good to be with all of you. I'm sorry it's not a happier occasion. I remember well, Eugenia, your husband's appearances at the McCain proceedings, and yours as well. And I want to thank you for your advocacy. I think the fate of Alexei Navalny makes a very strong and clear statement of the courage of Vladimir Kara-Murza, who subjected himself to arrest as well in the interest of freeing his country. It is a pretty astounding example of patriotism and courage, and I think we are just here to let you know and to affirm amongst ourselves that that has registered with us as a human matter and also as an important policy and political step towards what I look forward to being a favorable outcome. So, to happier days, when the moment comes that your husband's courage is rewarded with freedom and with the recognition and appreciation that he so deserves for having put himself in harm's way on principle on this very important subject. So God bless you. And as a member of the Helsinki Commission, among others, I want to assure that the Helsinki Commission is continue to do everything that we can to help support your husband as he undergoes this ordeal and try to help support a pathway to freedom for him as well. So God bless you, and God bless your family. Thank you. I have a book to sign.
Thank you for your leadership, Senator Whitehouse. I now want to invite Representative Stephen Cohen to the podium as co-chair of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, the first ever OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Special Representative on Political Prisoners. He has helped lead the fight against global kleptocracy, Congressional Caucus Against Foreign Corruption and Kleptocracy co-chair. We'll welcome the Congressman from Tennessee. Thank you.
It is with honor and sadness that I speak at this microphone. Vladimir Kara-Murza is one of the great heroes of our time. I put him right up there with Elie Wiesel and Julian Bond, two of my other friends who've shown great bravery and courage in moving our society forward. Vladimir came and talked to me one day, and he talked about the possibility of going back to Russia. And I discouraged that. But of course, I got the same answer that I think Mr. Khodorkovsky got, and I think everybody else got. I am a Russian politician. I must be in Russia. My country must be a free Russia, and I can do that best by being there. He knew what was the most effective way to free the Russian people of the yoke of Vladimir Putin, and that was to go there and be a voice. Putin doesn't accept voices, doesn't accept the truth. He tries to step on those people. Vladimir was arrested nearly 2 years ago and put in a prison in southwestern Siberia, which does not have good conditions and a good history. He is suffering there. And he's suffering because Putin wants him to suffer, and Putin has no heart, no soul. We have attempted to get the State Department to use all available possibilities. And I know the State Department has acted on Vladimir's part to help the family and to do things. But they've yet to use the Levinson Law to have him declared wrongfully detained. We have written and we have written and we have written. And I feel as if I'm writing to Vladimir Putin with the responses I'm getting from the State Department, because they've been basically blather. There's no reason they shouldn't do this, and I urge them once again to do it. You cannot be easy with Putin and expect any results. And we need to make sure that if the change takes place, that Vladimir Kara-Murza is part of it. And he's returned to his family and returned to freedom and the opportunity to live a free and fair life. He told me that the Helsinki Commission should have a special representative for political prisoners. He suggested that I should write the president of the Helsinki Commission and encourage such, which I did. And I know he did also. And he encouraged me to take the position. He was basically at that time asking me to stand up for him. And I will always stand up for him. Not just because I have this position, which is special, but because of the specialness of Vladimir Kara-Murza. The worst fear of a political prisoner is to be forgotten. He has not been forgotten, and you here today show he has not been forgotten. Let's remember Vladimir, let's urge the State Department to do right, and let's hope that good things can happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. I now want to turn to a good friend and colleague, Ambassador Maris Selga, the Latvian ambassador to the United States. I had the chance to get to know the ambassador when he was posted in the United States previously, and part of why he's here today is Vladimir Kara-Murza's heritage in Latvia. Valdemars Bišņik, Latvian revolutionary, was Kara-Murza's, Vladimir's great-grandfather, executed at the height of Joseph Stalin's purges as was a great-great-uncle of his, a Latvian diplomat. So Morris, Ambassador, please, the podium's yours.
Honorable guests, dear family members of Vladimir Kara-Murza. So I had the privilege, to be in this event also last year, unfortunately. So we are back again, and Vladimir is still in Russia, imprisoned. And I think as ambassador of Latvia, I'm honored to be here with you and standing against the great injustice faced by Vladimir and his family. As Damon mentioned, Vladimir Kara-Murza shares deep roots with Latvia, and as you already heard, his members even 100 years ago in Tsarist Russia were fighting against injustice, later on helping to build new country Latvia, and also working in Soviet Union, and afterwards, of course, were brutally killed by Soviet regime. His family history is a testament to sacrifice made by Latvians, Russians, and others in the struggle for freedom and democracy. Unfortunately, Vladimir faces the same persecution as his ancestors in modern-day Russia. Latvia is a strong advocate for holding the Putin regime accountable for its persecution of activists such as Vladimir Kara-Murza and for the war crimes and crime of aggression committed in Ukraine. The actions taken against Kara-Murza are attacks on the basic principles of democracy and the rule of law. To send a clear message, the international community cannot allow impunity. Vladimir Kara-Murza has dedicated his life and made extreme sacrifice to stand up for democracy and human rights. As we support him and condemn his imprisonment, we must commit to stopping Putin and hold him accountable. This includes by supporting Ukraine in every way possible and necessary until they achieve victory. And I am confident that if Western democracies, especially the United States of America, do not hesitate to support Ukraine and stand up against Putin, until he is defeated, we will see a brighter future for the world and for Russia. Then Vladimir Kara-Murza and other activists will be free to rebuild a strong, free and democratic Russia, and we must not waver until Vladimir is free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Vladimir Kara-Murza was a Russian patriot, but he spent a lot of time in the United Kingdom and became a citizen. So we're inviting Ambassador James Roscoe, who's the Deputy Head of Mission of the British Embassy here in the United States, to the podium. He served as the British Ambassador to the UN General Assembly, as Communications Secretary to Her Majesty, the Queen. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, and thank you to the National Endowment for Democracy for bringing us together today, and a huge thanks to Senator Cardin, the chairman, and also the other senators and Congress people who've spoken already. And good morning, Mrs. Kara-Murza. It's very good to see you and your family. As I was sat in that chair listening to the incredible eloquence and powerful words from you and from the congressman, I was looking at the photographs on either side of Vladimir Kara-Murza, and what strikes you immediately is his determination and his courage and his defiance. And we should be absolutely clear as we sit here today that Vladimir Kara-Murza is a political prisoner in Russia. He is a prisoner of Vladimir Putin, and he is a prisoner because he spoke out against the war in Ukraine and spoke out for democracy in Russia. I'm here today partly to reassure you that as the British government and as the British Diplomatic Service, we are doing everything in our power to support the release of Vladimir Kara-Murza. There is no greater diplomatic and consular priority for us at this time. And I know that it is incredibly difficult for you as a family because you want to see as much activity and action as possible. You refer to the fact you met the Foreign Secretary at the beginning of March, and I hope he was able to give you some reassurance as to the activity that we're engaged in. Our ambassador in Moscow, our deputy ambassador in Moscow, raised this at every possible opportunity with the Russian authorities. And just last week, our permanent representative to the UN raised it in very forceful terms with the Russian permanent representative to the UN. We absolutely take every opportunity we can to raise these issues. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to use every other possible avenue to do that, public and private. And I think you know that we are doing behind the scenes what we can as well to convince the Russian authorities to do the right thing in this matter. It is absolutely the case, as we've heard, that Mr. Kara-Murza is not the only person unjustly held by the Russian authorities. Many other activists share the same fate, and again, there are incredible photographs just in front of us. Let's remember their faces and let's remember their courage. So we will do all we can. We will make diplomatic interventions at the highest level. We will continue to consider further sanctions. As you know, we have sanctioned those people who we hold responsible both for the poisoning of Mr. Kara-Murza and also for his unjust imprisonment. And we will continue to raise his case on the international stage at every possible opportunity. It is, without doubt, one of the great injustices that he continues to be held. But the power of those who have spoken today, the power of the United States, the efforts of the United Kingdom will be unceasing in trying to secure his release. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's clear that Vladimir Kara-Murza's fate is the result of Vladimir Putin and his regime. And yet we've heard from the ambassadors from Latvia, the United Kingdom, how important diplomacy has been in his case. I next want to turn to a representative from the State Department, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Sonata Coulter, who has overseen Russia policy at the State Department with previous service both in Moscow, Yekaterinburg. Please, the podium is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I am grateful, I am saddened, and I am inspired to join with all of you in commemorating this sad occasion, the second anniversary of Vladimir's arrest in Moscow and his subsequent conviction for treason. I had the occasion to meet with him more than once during my most recent posting in Moscow. I know firsthand he is impressive in his tireless commitment to seeking a brighter future for his country. As I reflect on the Kremlin's decision to arrest and convict him for peaceful expression, I am appalled. The Kremlin's denial of Vladimir's freedom only underscores the Russian political system's weaknesses. I am also in awe of Vladimir's courage. As we have heard from the speakers this morning, Vladimir's imprisonment is an absence felt so deeply by many here and across the globe. By Eugenia, by his family, his colleagues, and all those who so cherish his company, his intellect, and his values. I know both from our conversations in Moscow and from listening to those close to him that Vladimir recognized the risks he took in traveling to Russia, but believed then, as he does now, in the justness of that choice. His commitment to speak boldly and truthfully about the rot within Russia's political system and the brutality of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has vividly highlighted Russia's descent into autocracy and its domination by Vladimir Putin. Even from prison in harsh conditions for crimes he did not commit, Vladimir continues to speak boldly in support of freedom and democracy. He speaks of a brighter future for Russia, as do many in this room. A Russia in which its citizens may take part in their constitutional rights, in meaningful participation in their government, in self-determination, and in peace. Vladimir Putin has falsely defended his full-scale invasion of Ukraine as denazification. Brave figures like Vladimir know that is a lie. And so, the United States continues to support Ukraine in defending itself. But we also know that Russia's internal repression enables its external aggression. These are inextricably linked, and we cannot address one without the other. Vladimir's case, as you've already heard, is sadly representative of the almost 700 political prisoners the Kremlin is estimated to currently hold. The Kremlin's reach and its transnational repression have surely affected many times that number. This chilling atmosphere reduces the space for free expression or peaceful dissent, contributing to a climate in which the Kremlin attempts to convince Russians and those around the world that the Kremlin's actions are justified or even popular. From the State Department, we continue to raise Vladimir's case with the Russian government at every opportunity. We've sanctioned a number of those responsible for oppressing him and continue to sanction more. We are committed to continuing to advocate forcefully for his release. Whether the Secretary, our ambassador in Moscow, at the OSCE, at the UN, or at other diplomatic fora around the world, we will continue to advocate for Vladimir and others like him. It's my sincere hope, and the department's priority, to see him released as soon as possible. I hope we do not have occasion to meet like this again, but as long as the Kremlin continues to punish those who speak for democratic values, we will speak up for these prisoners, and we will continue to do so until Russia takes up the brighter path that brave souls like Vladimir Kara-Murza campaign for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonata. We will have other members who will be joining us throughout the proceedings, but we're also joined here today by people who have been champions of Vladimir Kara-Murza, his career, his voice over the years, and organizations that have rallied around his cause. So we're going to bring in some of those champions and friends of Vladimir. We've heard about, you know about the power of his voice, the power of his pen. He had a special message. I'll ask our colleagues about that in just a moment. But he also had champions at places like the Washington Post that ensured that that voice was amplified. So as we move in, and I invite our next two speakers, I'm going to introduce them. I want to just remind you, we do invite all of you to take time today to write your own letter to Vladimir, to join us at this desk, to be part of the Free Russia Foundation's effort to ensure that political prisoners hear from those around the world who support them and know you're on their side. Christian Carroll, David Hoffman, an incredible tandem that amplified his voice. Christian is an independent journalist. He was Vladimir's longtime editor. A longtime editor at the Washington Post. He's continued to help translate and be part of amplifying his message. Christian said something recently in the wake of the death of Alexei Navalny that really channeled the spirit of Vladimir. He said that Alexei Navalny's death represents the culmination of the Kremlin's efforts to push the country into a deep political freeze. That's obvious, but his legacy is a new generation of Russians who yearn to imagine alternatives to Putin's regime. That is Vladimir's message as well. I'm going to invite Christian to be joined by David Hoffman, who's on the Washington Post editorial board. He's been a contributing editor of the Washington Post. He was a diplomatic correspondent for the newspaper's bureau chief in Moscow, the foreign editor, the author of the remarkable The Oligarchs to Put Spot, and joined in common cause in amplifying Vladimir's message. Let me invite Christian David to join us on the podium. And let me ask you that you worked with Vladimir for many years. You saw his voice as a powerful voice for Russia. Why did his message resonate? What really stood out in Vladimir's messages?
I'd like to give you a little bit of history and answer.
For our live stream audience, just make sure the microphone.
I'm going to tell you just a brief little history story because I believe the answer runs deeper than just Putin. On May 29th, 1970, a very prominent microbiologist in Soviet system, Zhorish Medvedev, was hauled off to a psychiatric unit in Kaluga, southwest of Moscow. Joris had published a book, The Rise and Fall of T.D. Lysenko, which kind of skewered this strange genetic theories of Stalin's favorite biologist. And he had also published a new book that was about to calling for international scientific cooperation. Well, these books, and particularly the Lysenko book, made him a lot of enemies in the power structure. People thought Lysenko was a genius when he was really a crackpot. And as soon as Joris was taken into this psychiatric unit, his friends and family immediately began to try and organize protest. His twin brother, Roy, started to call people, write people, demand an end to this. He says in a note he wrote to the Procurator General, this action violates regulations. And, I mean, this is the Soviet system, and they were determined to call attention to the actual rules, supposedly, that the system lived by and which it was violating. Even in prison, Joris, in this prison of this psychiatric unit where he was being held against his will, Joris realized he was being committed as a political prisoner for his beliefs. The whole performance was obviously an attempt at psychiatric blackmail, he wrote. They wanted to take the things he had written, his books, his speaking his mind, and discredit them all, also discredit the works of his brother. And he wrote later a book about this, and it was titled, a small book, it was titled A Question of Madness. Andrei Sakharov, on June 6th, a week later, got involved and wrote a letter to Brezhnev. Again, this was quite remarkable that people were sort of thinking maybe they could solve this problem of a political prisoner by writing to the bosses. And Sakharov wrote, this whole action was totally illegal from beginning to end. There is no evidence that Joris Medvedev was mentally abnormal. He acted strictly within the law. And Sakharov said the hospital staff are using tactics of subterfuge and delay. Those who initiated and carried out this illegal action must be severely punished, Sakharov wrote to Brezhnev. A week later, Alexander Solzhenitsyn weighed in, and he wrote a letter. I want to quote a part of it. He wrote, this could happen tomorrow to any of us. Even the appeals of our best scientists and writers are to no avail. It's like talking to a blank wall. If this were only the first case, but it's become fashionable, this way of settling accounts with no pretense at seeking out guilt when it's too shameful to state the real reason. It's time to understand, Solzhenitsyn wrote, and I remind you, this is summer of 1970. It's time to understand that the imprisonment of sane persons in madhouses because they have minds of their own is killing the spirit. And that kind of killing goes on longer and more painful than actually killing somebody, Solzhenitsyn said. So everything that Sakharov and Solzhenitsyn said in this moment of emergency, of a prisoner of conscience, of somebody taken against their will because of their beliefs, is relevant to us today in our concern about what's happened with Vladimir Kara-Murza. I'm actually very glad that Vladimir Kara-Murza knows this history and is still smiling it, like Alexei Navalny, reminding us that he will not give in to the killing of the spirit. But I'd just like to make a point about where we are in this time. The Medvedev brothers and other Soviet dissidents were actually far less political than those of today. The Soviet dissidents had anti-communist and anti-Soviet ideas. They were thinkers inspired by the moment of freedom during the Khrushchev thaw. Many of them were driven by their conscience, but not by political ambition or by a desire to change the Soviet system. Many of them said in retrospect, they didn't have the slightest idea of actually making a political difference. They did what their conscience told them. And compared to them, consider what Vladimir Kara-Murza stands for, what Alexei Navalny stood for, and Boris Nemtsov. They have aspired to make a political difference, to change Russia and change the system and reverse this authoritarian slide. And they had their own very powerful thaw. They had the example of taste and experience of freedom in the Yeltsin years, the example of Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny. I'm one of those who believe that we actually had entered a period of a new Russia. I used that word new Russia in a book I wrote, and it didn't last long. But I think their message to us is not to give up hope or give up faith in a new Russia. At the end of the day, Putin's opponents are in jail just like the Soviet dissidents were. Boris Medvedev was lucky. He got out of that psychiatric unit. He was released on June 17th, less than 3 weeks after he was taken. I hope we all see the day when Vladimir also walks out, and Evan and the others, and I hope that Vladimir will write a book and title it A Question of Madness. Not his, but his captors. Thank you.
David, thank you so much.
Hi. So I had the great privilege to work as an editor in the opinion section of the Washington Post for 7 years, ending just last December. And during that period, I had the immense privilege of being Vladimir's editor. I just want to say that as a jaded, cynical journalist, that I always looked forward to receiving Vladimir's articles. They came by a very circuitous route. He would meet with his lawyer in the waiting room of whatever prison he happened to be in at the moment. His lawyer would take these texts, pass them on to Eugenia. Eugenia would pass them on to me. Usually, they were written in English. Vladimir Kara-Murza writes English better than most of the native speakers that I've edited in my career as a journalist. So receiving his articles was always a great moment for me, I must say selfishly. In that period when I was his editor, the whole cause of democracy and freedom around the world was in big trouble, and it was a very, very dispiriting story to cover. And yet, even though he was imprisoned, even though his family was suffering and making these terrible sacrifices, it was always a thrill to get his words. And I remember very vividly that when I would tell the morning meeting that we had another piece from Vladimir, you could sense the mood in the room lift, because people were so thrilled to be doing this work. It remains one of the high points of my journalistic career. Talk is cheap. We love to talk in this country about freedom and democracy, but we are very rarely called upon to sacrifice for it, to do something real to promote our own freedom and democracy. We take our own freedom and democracy terribly, terribly for granted. Vladimir did not. He was willing to fight, to make tremendous sacrifices for the sake of freedom and democracy in Russia. I really don't think any of us should forget that. He inspired me personally, I speak here very personally, with his belief in freedom and democracy at a time when that belief was suffering here in our own country, a country, by the way, whose travails he understood also very, very well. David and I both have the distinct, shall we call it privilege, to have met Vladimir Kara-Murza and also to have spent time in a room with Vladimir Putin. I think there may be a few other people in the room who have done that, but there aren't many. And I have to say that Mr. Putin has found in Vladimir Kara-Murza, having met both men, I could feel I can say this, he has found in Vladimir Kara-Murza a very worthy adversary. And I think in many respects, Vladimir has already won. Thanks very much.
Christian, David, thank you for sharing those personal reflections, weaving Vladimir's connection to history, to the dissident movement, to the power of his voice today. I now want to turn to a member of Congress who has been a champion of democracy, freedom, human rights around the world, Representative Jim McGovern, who represents the state of Massachusetts as the ranking member of the House Rules Committee. He's been chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and has been a champion of legislation to identify and hold accountable foreign officials and human rights abusers. Congressman, thank you for your leadership.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I am honored to join so many of my distinguished colleagues today to call for the release of my friend, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was unjustly detained by Russian authorities on April 11th, 2022. For those who are watching this being live streamed, I just want to point out that this room is packed, standing room only. I think it's a demonstration that there are people in this country and there are people all around the world who care very deeply about this issue. And it's also always an honor to join Eugenia here, who has demonstrated such courage and grace under these very, very difficult circumstances. Vladimir is in prison for daring to exercise his fundamental human rights to freedom of speech, expression, and dissent. Just look at the charges against him: public dissemination of information, participating in the activities of a foreign non-governmental organization, and providing assistance to a foreign organization by taking part in international events. In other words, giving speeches. For this, he has been sentenced to 25 years and sent to a Siberian prison. We all know the truth. Kara-Murza is in jail for opposing Russia's descent into authoritarianism under Vladimir Putin and for daring to criticize Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The whole world knows the truth. The entire world knows the truth. And that is why there are calls from around the globe for his release. This is urgent. This is urgent. Russian prisons are notorious for their death toll. Sergei Magnitsky died in a Russian prison. Alexei Navalny died in a Russian prison. Sitting in a Siberian prison, Vladimir's health is at risk. His life is at risk. And those in Russia with hope for a better future should not have to lose another leader to Putin's fear and paranoia. Today, like many of my other colleagues, I am writing to Vladimir to promise him that we will continue to advocate for his immediate and unconditional release for as long as it takes, and to tell him that he is not forgotten. I renew my call to President Biden to do all he can to ensure Vladimir's release. And I say this again, this is urgent. And let me be clear, Vladimir is not the only political prisoner in Russia. In October 2021, the Memorial Center for Human Rights listed 420 prisoners of conscience in Russia. 80 of them were imprisoned on political grounds. Then Putin shut down Memorial. American citizens are also victims of Russia's failed justice system. I cheered when Trevor Reed and Brittany Griner were freed, but Paul Whelan is still in a Russian prison, and so is Evan Gershkovich. Vladimir must be freed, and so must all the rest. And I hope and pray that our action today contributes to achieve this. And I continue to call upon this administration to remember that if the United States stands for anything, we're supposed to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. This is a human rights issue, if there ever was one. And we need to do more. And again, I will just say to Evgeny and to all of Vladimir's friends is that we will not stop until he's released. We will continue to raise our voices. We will continue to have gatherings like this all throughout the country and all throughout the world. Thank Thank you all so much for having me here today.
Congressman, thank you for the reminder of the urgency, for the determination to pursue this. I now want to turn to Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who has been a remarkable voice for American leadership around democracy and human rights on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as chair of the Europe and Regional Security Cooperation Subcommittee, the first woman who in U.S. history was elected both governor of New Hampshire as well as a U.S. senator, a member of the Armed Services, co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group, as well as the vice chair of the Ukraine caucus. She's been a champion and a friend of Vladimir. Please, Senator.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here and for showing how much you care about what's happening in Russia. To Vladimir Kara-Murza and so many other people who have been willing to speak out and call what's happening in Russia wrong. Welcome to Eugenia and all the children, Vladimir's children. We're so glad you're here with us today. And Eugenia, you've been a tireless advocate, and I know that Vladimir is proud to see that you have continued his fight. We all know that Vladimir, knowing the risks, returned to Russia 2 years ago to stand up to Putin, to condemn the unprovoked war in Ukraine. I had the opportunity to be on a panel with him. You may know this, but shortly before he went back to Russia, a few months before, and I was asking him about the risks. And he said, I have to go back. I'm paraphrasing. But what struck me was he said, the Russian people are better than this. You never hear Vladimir Putin talking about the Russian people being better. He said they deserve to have their freedom. And the fact that he's willing to put his life on the line for that freedom, I think, speaks to all of us who care about human rights around the world. It's now our responsibility to make sure that Vladimir can continue to speak up. He must be released immediately. I urge the State Department to designate Vladimir as a wrongfully detained individual, and I call on our British allies to use the resources at their disposal to advocate for Vladimir's release. His fight to uplift the voices of the Russian people keeps the flame of democracy alive in Russia and everywhere around the globe where autocrats seek to extinguish it. He gives hope to all of those who fight against renewed Russian aggression from Georgia to Ukraine. He gives a voice to those who dedicated their lives for a better future, people like Alexei Navalny. A democratic future can and will exist for Russia at some point. Thanks to Vladimir, to Eugenia and his family, to all of you who are committed to this cause. Thank you for your commitment.
Thank you for your leadership, Senator Shaheen. Next, we're going to continue with two organizations who have been at the center of the struggle for a free Russia, for freedom for Russians. I'm going to invite Natalia Arnaud, Ani Boyanyan from Freedom House, Natalia Arnaud from the Free Russia Foundation to join me on stage. Natalia Arnaud was the founder of the Free Russia Foundation. Before that, she spent, I think you spent 10 years as country director for Russia of the International Republican Institute within the Ned family. The Free Russia Foundation has taken a leading role for what so many political prisoners in Russia believe in, a free Russia. Annie here at Freedom House has been one of the organizations long a champion of human rights and democracy around the world, carrying the Mark Palmer Distinguished Fellow title at Freedom House, a very special leader in this field, and someone who herself brings experience having worked in the House and the Senate. So I want to turn to the two of you, and I want to ask you, maybe Natalia first. The Kremlin has this narrative that outspoken leaders like Vladimir, like Ilya Yashin, who's here on this poster, like Alexei Navalny, that they're marginal, that they don't represent Russian voices, the Russian people, that they're outliers. You spend every day working with Russians that believe in a different Russia. How do you answer that concern, that allegation, that these voices are marginal? They're not the future of Russia. Please, Natalia.
Thank you so much, Damon. And at first, let me thank everybody. Let me thank Senator Cardin and his incredible team for hosting us today. Tom, Danny, all the team. And the coalition of, I think now, 12 organizations, including National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House. I actually want also to single out Pedro Pisano, who was organizing all of us to do this. I recently received a letter from Vladimir through this digital gulag, as he says, this Russian prison mailing system. Unfortunately, now we cannot do anything through the lawyers, especially after the arrest of Alexei Navalny's lawyers and because Vladimir's lawyer had to get evacuated last year. So please write the letters through, and we will send it through this digital gulag. So usually Vladimir gives very easy requests, like please make sure that you show me the UN petition before you're submitting it, or please give me the latest digest of latest news, or very easy task for Eugenia, please create a charity to help families of political prisoners. This time he asked me to thank everybody who cares about him and who supports his cause, our cause, and now I have a full-time job. It's a lot of people who supports Vladimir. Thank you for that. And on your question, this is what the Kremlin wants to believe, that like our movement is marginal. There are not a lot of us. But if you are a strong leader, if you are the strong and loved leader, why would you need to falsify elections all 25 years of your rule? Why do you need this incredible, unprecedented, zombifying propaganda on 24/7 basis? Why are you afraid even to pronounce the name of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny? And you, Damon, gave a lot of numbers. Yes, we have 699 at least political prisoners, including Vladimir. Those who are not afraid to stand up against regime. At least 800 those who prosecuted for anti-war stance. At least 20,000 who were protested and detained against this brutal war in Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Millions of people who had to flee Russia because they disagreed with this brutal policy, because they don't like the country that occupies, annexes, kills, and they continue to fight from exile and reaching people. The collective reach of all Russian independent journalists and civil society inside Russia, at least 30 million people. Our recent efforts of the anti-war propaganda of 15 different organizations reached 46 million people. Majority of them are inside Russia. So again, it's very wrong to say that this is marginal. These are people who were last year in Brussels dialogue, who were saying how much they've achieved doing different projects, supporting Ukraine, fighting against propaganda, analyzing the effectiveness of sanctions, and so on. Many of them you'll see this upcoming June here in our joint efforts of the Washington dialogue. So please welcome. It will be hopefully a good event. But Vladimir, he represents the best what Russia can be. He is the voice and face of pro-democracy Russians. We do need him. We call him very often as an ambassador of a free and democratic Russia. He was telling about Boris Nemtsov that he was the best president Russia never had. But he himself, he is the best former minister of the future democratic and free Russia. We just need to achieve it as soon as possible. We do need him here. And it's very important with this designation. There are no legal barriers for this designation of the wrongfully detained. He is a U.S. resident, his family are all U.S. citizens. And, but moreover, it's in the U.S. tradition to champion and free political prisoners. It will send a very strong signal to the Kremlin that the U.S. and the allies are invested in Vladimir's fate and Vladimir's vision for Russia. And it will convey this importance to the U.S. allies that it's important to free Vladimir. It also will send a very strong message to Russian people that the U.S. is very serious and stands on its principles and defends democracy and human rights defenders. So we do need Vladimir here now after this brutal assassination of Alexei Navalny. The urgency has increased to save him. He is now political enemy number one for Vladimir Putin, for his promotion of Magnitsky personal sanctions, for his fight for democracy in Russia. We do need him here, but as he himself said, there are people who will always be supporting us. Like, I also want to single out a few more people here. Anna Veduta, she is the first press secretary of Alexei Navalny, until recently vice president of Anti-Corruption Foundation. She knows how, again, even if some leaders are killed, there are a lot of people who continue this fight. And also Veronika Shulgina, assistant of Ilya Yashin, who received 8.5 years in jail for telling the truth about Bucha. All those people, lawyers, journalists, all of us, we continue our fight. We do need your support. It's very important. Solidarity is our biggest weapon against dictators, and Russia will be free, and Vladimir will be the best foreign minister of Russia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natalia. Annie, could you add the perspective from Freedom House? You know, many look at what's happening in Russia today. They see Vladimir Putin's face. They see the war. They don't see underlying networks of civic groups, community groups, civil society, an anti-war movement. How do you think about this from the Freedom House perspective?
Thank you, Damon. I have to say, first, it's such an honor to be here representing Freedom House. I think everyone in this room could stand up and tell a personal story about Vladimir, and it's such a testament to his power as a leader, to his power as an advocate, but also just what a wonderful, funny, passionate guy he was. And we also know that his great strength is bolstered by Eugenia and his family. Eugenia, you are one of the most amazing powerhouse women I've ever met, and it was evident to anyone who ever had the pleasure of being in a room with your husband how much he loves you and your family and how bolstered he feels by you. So I know that he is fighting because he knows that you are with him. We are so honored at Freedom House that Vladimir was our 2023 Freedom Award winner, and I think there is no one better positioned to answer this question than Damon, than Vladimir himself. He always talked and still talks and does such a great job explaining that Vladimir Putin does not represent the Russian people. And you've heard wonderful examples from Natalia and others about how people across Russia are standing up. The price of truth-telling in Russia is so high right now, and yet people continue to do it. So you've heard the number of more than 800 in prison for standing up against the war. There are all sorts of creative acts of dissent happening. There are poets reading their poems on the streets. There are musicians who are singing. There was even someone who went into a supermarket and changed the price tags on items to make it the price of the cost of war. Really incredible, powerful interventions that are happening. At the same time, repression is intensifying, and a human rights defender who I know said a lot of folks feel like they have to get quieter in their acts and are being driven more into silence, yet if you look closely, you will still see it. And this person said to me, Annie, do not mistake quieter acts for silence or inaction. There are hundreds of thousands of us here who continue to speak out. And so you've heard many people here say there is so much more we in the United States can do. The fact that Vladimir Kara-Murza is in prison rests on Putin and his cronies alone, but it is an obligation to all of us to take actual action and speak out. And so I brought a prop. Back in February, we were so honored to lead a letter to the administration urging them to designate Mr. Kara-Murza as wrongfully detained. You've already heard that this would send a powerful message and prioritize his case for release. And so more than 70 individuals, many of you in this room, signed this letter. Washington Post ran a wonderful ad. We are so grateful. Here, I'll move it over because I know you want a better picture. It can be so hard in these dark times to feel like there's anything we can actually do to help people. And we at Freedom House are so bolstered by Vladimir himself, and his great courage inspires us to continue to fight, and we will not give up that fight until the people of Russia are free, and we're honored to stand alongside you at doing that.
Annie, I'll ask you one more question. I'm going to ask Natalia one more question.
Okay.
That was great. While we're waiting on Senator Risch, others who are going to be joined, let me pose the same type question to unpack this a little bit, Natalia, from your perspective, because you work in and out, day in and out, with civil society in Russia, many in exile, and yet many watching this live stream are skeptical that there is a desire for demand for change, that there is a network. Can you talk a little bit about your view as Free Russia Foundation, a civil society that grew after the collapse of the Soviet Union and seems to many observers to have disappeared? Is that not the case? And help us understand why. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's very difficult to believe polls in a military dictatorship, though even those polls, even of pro-Kremlin pollsters, are saying that the genuine support for the war is really low. It's like 10%, 15% maximum. Again, if we only we're judging by the numbers, falsified numbers of these so-called elections, or these very doubtful polls, it would be one story maybe. And it's, I really urge you not to just judge by headlines or by some surface numbers and all that. When you work with real people daily, and you at NED, you know it very well, and Freedom House as well. When you work with those people in exile, inside the country, committed and doing something every day, it's very difficult to just find strength in all these brutal times and continue our fight. But we are doing this, and of course all these people are inspiring us. We cannot give up when they are there. When there are many others who want Russia to be free and democratic. And we see a lot of efforts. We see that Russia is now the second country in the world to install VPNs. People do want to receive truthful information despite all these blockages of websites and censorship, military censorship at the moment. There are people who, on the grassroots level, that continue doing a lot of things. Vladimir, again, in this recent letter to me, he said, these 2 years of being imprisoned actually made me believe in Russia and Russian people even more. I receive I'm paraphrasing him, he's receiving letters from all corners of Russia. Just very recent example, he was very touched by a group from Novosibirsk when there was this very brutal law in my native Republic of Buryatia to murder all homeless dogs. The people from Novosibirsk came just to save them and brought to their region because there is no that law there yet. Again, all these people are ready to fight, are ready to move, and again, working with them daily, we see their courage, we see their, like again, when somebody is imprisoned or even worse, assassinated or had to flee from Russia, there are people who stand up and are doing a lot of things. And again, we cannot, I understand the skepticism, especially in the West, it's easier. But we, pro-democracy Russians, we cannot afford not to believe in that. And we see this striking difference between Putin, who is an outdated dictator, obsessed with this, his imaginary, his distorted image of heroic Russian past, and people like Alexei Navalny, like Boris Nemtsov, and imprisoned leaders like Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, many, many of us, with this beautiful Russia of the future, with this vision, we had to fight for it every day. We cannot afford to be skeptical. We cannot give up. So please help us. It's very important. This enemy, unfortunately, is very strong. It's not only Russia's war against Ukraine now. It's a battle between dictatorship and the democratic world with Ukraine on its front lines. And we need the efforts of all free people in the entire world to unite our efforts and help us in this fight, because only democracy in Russia is a guarantee, as Eugenia was saying, is a guarantee of sustainability of Ukraine's victory, and as a key factor in stability and security in the region. This is what we all need. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you. Thank you. Please, please. You can sit down. I ask the question not from a position of skepticism. At the National Endowment for Democracy, we are inundated with interest, with demand from Russians in exile and in Russia who crave a different future, who believe in a different future, as you heard from Natalia. Thank you for sharing that.
One of the things Vladimir was a remarkable policy entrepreneur. His advocacy was instrumental in getting the Magnitsky Act passed in the United States, similar measures in the European Union and Canada. So I'm going to invite two of my colleagues next who have been part of this coalition to champion Vladimir Kara-Murza, a free Russia, those who are imprisoned. I'm going to invite Alina Polyakova, Adam Keith to join me on stage. Adam Keith is a Senior Director for Accountability at Human Rights First, where he's been coordinating a coalition of NGOs that use the Global Magnitsky Act and other targeted sanctions to pursue accountability, someone who came to this after service in the US government. Alina Polyakova, the leader of CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis, the president and CEO. She's also the Donald Marin Senior Fellow at SAIS and has been an outspoken advocate for Ukraine, for Russia, for democracy and freedom in the region. Let me ask you to come forward as folks who have worked at this intersection of this policy space, where Vladimir was so effective. Share with us a little bit of how you saw his policy entrepreneurship to build support for the Global Magnitsky Act. How have these tools, how have these tools been effective? What opportunities are there to reinforce them? And where do you see the state, if you weren't campaigning for political prisoners in Russia today, what would be the next phase of Vladimir's policy entrepreneurship? Please, Keith and Alina.
Thanks, Damon. It's always humbling to be with Eugenia and the Kara-Murza family, and an honor for Human Rights First to be one of the organizations supporting today's event and to have worked with Vladimir, who has been a senior advisor to us on human rights accountability since the summer of 2020. We've worked with him specifically on the implementation and the multilateralizing of Magnitsky sanctions. And you asked us to talk about Vladimir as a policy entrepreneur, and I want to talk about just very briefly about how the smart policy tool for accountability that he helped produce reflects his values and values that we share. The whole premise of the Magnitsky sanctions is to insist, as Vladimir does, that accountability for human rights abuse and corruption lies with individuals and not with an entire country. It insists that the United States has responsibilities to confront its own complicity in kleptocratic systems like the one that governs Russia. Working with Vladimir has been just an opportunity to see what smart, humane advocacy looks like. He has insisted that the Magnitsky Project, it has been and has to remain bipartisan. He's focused on not just the hard work of legislating these tools into being, but also the hard work of getting them implemented by the governments that hold them. And being responsive to the advocates who are affected by the abuses and corruption and need to have a say in how these tools are used. He's insisted that the U.S.'s voice is stronger when it's not acting alone, when it's that the United States is more credible when it acts with others. We had the honor to work with Vladimir putting together a conference about the multilateralizing of Magnitsky sanctions, and I think a key next step in that project has been to make sure that the European Union fills a gap in its policy efforts. It doesn't have the anti-corruption tool that the United States and the UK have. And lastly, just of special importance to us has been that as focused as Vladimir has been on the importance of a free Russia, that these tools aren't just for adversary governments like Russia. They're for any authoritarian system, friendly ones included, that are responsible for abuse and corruption. So our message to the US government for 2 years has been about, in the context of Vladimir's case, that it needs to take more responsibility for his fate, that it's in the US interest that Vladimir and other dissidents like him survive, and that the US has tools on the shelf, including in the Levinson Act, to vindicate the hope that he shares with everyone and to protect him from the danger that he faces. Yeah, I think that's...
Keith, thanks for calling that out. Alina, you understand the personal and the policy. As a Ukrainian American, as a leader of a policy think tank, speak to Vladimir's use of policy for freedom.
Thank you so much, Damon, and it really is such an honor to be here, joined by all of my colleagues from these distinguished institutions and the Kara-Murza family. Eugenia, thank you for being here today. It's also been an honor for me to be a board member of the Free Russia Foundation that Natalia, who you heard from earlier, leads. Incredibly courageous woman, Natalia Arnaud, who just gave us remarks. But I'm Vladimir. You know, I was reflecting last night as I was writing a letter to him, what made and makes Vladimir Volodya such a singular individual. And there's so many words that came to mind. I mean, every adjective: courage, persistence, moral vision, moral compass, a dedication that he had to that clarity of vision and morality that is so rare in all of our countries and all of our societies. And I wanted to really think about what gave him the ability to mobilize coalitions across the world. This individual from Russia who got this US Congress to pass one of the most effective tools for imposing costs and abusers of human rights in Russia and now globally. And that he didn't do just here, but in the EU, in the UK, Australia, New Zealand. So many countries have passed versions of the Global Magnitsky Act. And without Vladimir, that would not have happened. And how incredible is that, to think about this individual who was able to mobilize the world. But then why did he do this? A huge, huge risk to himself, obviously. Why did he do this? And I think, to me, what I experienced in my interactions with Volodya is a belief in people and a belief and a commitment to hope. I was looking at the picture here on the placard of him, and you can see, if you look into his eyes, I think the fact that despite the greatest odds and the greatest obstacles, he never gave up hope. And I think that behooves us in this room and all of these institutions that support him and think about him and are trying to find ways to support him both morally, but also to make sure that what he believed in, the hope that he has in his eyes, continues to be alive. And that starts with us doing what he did for us, mobilizing to make sure that we get him out. And not just him, there's also Ilya Yashin on this placard here. And Vladimir is the face of so many political prisoners, but he's not the only one. But bringing him back, bringing him home to his family, that will be the most important sign, I think, that we can give not just Russian society, but Ukrainian society as well. Because at the end of the day, this is all about our joint fight for freedom and democracy. And there's no one that embodies that more than Volodya. And for us at SIPA, he's been an inspiration to start a program to support Russian opposition, also at risks to them and to us. And I see one of our fellows here in the audience, and I've been so grateful to have Volodya's vision, his moral compass in my mind as we think about what else can we do to make sure that whenever this authoritarian dictatorial regime ends in Russia, because it will end, that people like Volodya will be there to take up the reins of leadership and to have a different future for the Russian people and Russian society. But I don't think we can underestimate what he has done for us in this country to give us the ability to impose costs on abusers of human rights across the world that we would not have been able to do without him, and we have to come together for him now as well.
Thank you. Elena Keith, thank you so much. Thank you. We're gathered here in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and we're going to hear next from the ranking member, Senator Jim Risch, who has been a champion, whether from China, Afghanistan, to Russia, to Ukraine, someone who served as governor of Idaho, but entered politics at a young age, 27, can identify with Ilya Yashin, can identify with Vladimir Kara-Murza as they entered politics at a young age. Senator, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for hosting.
Well, welcome all of you to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'm glad we've been able to be a host of this event, and that all of us can bring attention to Vladimir's condition and his predicament. We all want to use this venue to show our support for Vladimir and to his family and all of the other political prisoners that are sitting in Putin's prisons. After Alexei Navalny's death in prison, very much like the one that Vladimir is in, I think we are all more aware of the dangers to his life. The Kremlin has tried to kill Vladimir before, and there is certainly a significant risk that they may try to do this again. I know several of us have called for Vladimir to be designated as a wrongfully detained person by Secretary Blinken. I've talked with Secretary Blinken about this, and I want to, again, here and now, reiterate that call today for that designation. This would elevate his case and provide resources to his family as they fight for his freedom. While Vladimir has worked in Russian politics for years, he is a U.S. legal permanent resident, and his wife and children are American citizens. Our government must continue to work to bring him home. And with that, I'd like to read a letter that I've written to him. And I'm not accustomed to writing letters into Russia. I hope he gets this letter. I don't know what their delivery system is like there, but I'm certainly, the department will do its best to get this to him. Dear Vladimir, I hope you are well as can be under the current circumstances. I hope the receipt of this letter and the many other letters sent to you today by my colleagues will help lift your spirits and make clear our support and solidarity. I applaud your dedication to stating the truth about Russia's reprehensible invasion of Ukraine and Putin's gross violations of human rights and democratic aspirations of the Russian people. Congress remains in awe of your persistence in fighting for a better Russia, even when your life is at risk. Since your arrest, my colleagues and I have advocated for your release publicly and privately. We will not stop until you are safely home. You should also know that we continue to advocate that for you to be designated as wrongfully detained by the Secretary of State. The support for you, Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich, and other prisoners go well beyond the walls of the United States Congress. The American people are with us in demanding your release. My family and I will continue to pray for your strength. I hope to meet you again face-to-face when you finally return home to your family. Very truly yours, James Irish, Ranking Member, Senator of the Foreign Relations Committee. Someone needs to tell me how much postage I need to pay. God bless you all. Thanks for coming. We'll continue the fight.
Thank you so much for your leadership on these issues, Senator. And like the Senator, I'm going to reiterate and encourage those who have joined during the course of the proceedings to continue to come to this desk, to come forward, and to send your own personal letter to Vladimir Kara-Murza and other political prisoners. You've heard throughout today discussion of Boris Nemtsov, Ilya Yashin, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Alexei Navalny. These are remarkable political figures. As Christian said earlier, in many respects, Vladimir Putin has met his challenge with the incredible integrity, determination, courage of these political leaders, of Volodya. So I want to turn next to two of our colleagues who have been part of championing the legacy of those who have cherished freedom, fought for freedom, to Rachel Hoff, who's here with the Reagan Institute, Kristen Abrams with the McCain Institute. They've joined us as part of the coalition that put together this event. Rachel's the policy director at the Reagan Institute, which is the Washington office of the President Ronald Reagan Foundation. Previously, she served as a speechwriter, policy advisor for Senator John McCain as well. Kristen Abrams is the chief program officer at the McCain Institute. She leads the work on human rights and freedom, democracy, leadership programs, directed the human trafficking program, and also began a career up here. I want to ask what drew John McCain and Vladimir Kara-Murza together. How do you see Vladimir Volodya's contribution to extend the legacy of these two remarkable American politicians who were outspoken voices for freedom and freedom fighters? Please.
Thanks, Damon, for your wonderful job moderating and emceeing today. Eugenia, it's so wonderful to see you again. In addition to all the work that you're doing to fight for your husband and the Russian people, You should write a book on parenting because your children are remarkable. Mine are the same age, and they would not have been so patient and poised. So well done there. Your husband and your father is very proud. Thank you for having me and the McCain Institute today. I must thank my colleague Pedro Pisano, who has done so much work bringing us all together today. To your question, what drew Senator McCain and Vladimir together are their shared interest in fighting for freedom and democracy for the Russian people and for people everywhere. And the second thing is their willingness to stand up despite considerable risk. When we heard from Vladimir's editor today, I was really moved, and it struck me it was something that I observed from Senator McCain as well. The ability to have hope and optimism in face of dire conditions. And I hope we can all take away a little bit of that hope and optimism today. Just a minute about the senator and his unwavering commitment to the Russian people. And in preparation today, my colleague Pedro and I looked back at some of the things the senator has said for many, many years. In 1996, he warned of the danger of Russia's nostalgia for empire and advocated even then for conditioning financial assistance because of Russia's behavior. In 2003, he decried Putin's czarist authoritarianism. In 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia, he then condemned Russia, when many, as we will remember, called for calm. And in 2017, he said very clearly, Vladimir Putin is an evil man, and he is intent on evil deeds, which include the destruction of the current liberal world order. Vladimir Kara-Murza is carrying on Senator McCain's legacy of standing up for human rights. We will do whatever it takes to bring him home. Annie, thank you for your message that while dissidents and others may get quiet, we here have the luxury of being loud. So I hope you will all join me in carrying on the great work of Vladimir Kara-Murza and Senator McCain in being loud.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Rachel, as you bring in the perspective of the Reagan Foundation and the vision of President Reagan for freedom, you also had a personal relationship with Vladimir. So share that with us as well, please.
Well, thanks, Damon, and thanks to all of you for joining, to Eugenia, to Vladimir's children. It's such an honor to be here. Of course, we all wish we didn't have cause to be here today, and we all wish, of course, that Vladimir and are working actively across our many organizations and the champions here on Capitol Hill that we've heard from to see Vladimir free and to see him back with his family where he belongs. Damon, you know, your questions to Kristen and to myself about what Vladimir shared with Senator McCain, with President Reagan, and in my time knowing him, I think what strikes me as what those three men have in common is something that Damon started with today. In some way, it can feel discouraging to be here yet again, calling for his release on the second. The marking of 2 years since his imprisonment. But what Vladimir shares with President Reagan, what he shared with Senator McCain, is a relentless and eternal optimism. I'll note, too, that something those three men have in common is, even in the toughest of times, to never lose his sense of humor. And I think that's something that we can all be encouraged by. I know if Vladimir were here today to see this event, he would take great inspiration from what we've heard from our political leaders, from bipartisan political leaders from across the aisle who have joined us today, calling for the release not only of Vladimir, but of the political prisoners that we see here pictured. So many in this room count Vladimir as a friend, and to Damon's question, I got to know Vladimir about 15 years ago when he started coming to Washington, D.C. with his friend and mentor, Boris Nemtsov. I would help arrange their meetings here on Capitol Hill, walk these halls, and meet with so many senators and members of Congress. They warned us even then about that erosion of freedom and democracy in Russia that Senator McCain knew so well. One of the highlights in my time working for Senator McCain was attending, along with Vladimir, the renaming of the street in front of the Russian embassy as Boris Nemtsov Plaza. He had by then been assassinated by the Kremlin. And that day was such a proud one for so many, for Senator McCain, certainly for Vladimir and for the Russian people. And it struck me that renaming of the street in front of the Russian embassy was such a Vladimir idea. It was so bold and patriotic in defense of the Russian people. It was so provocative and creative in its opposition to the Kremlin and to Putin's regime. It was a message to the Kremlin, but more than that, it was a message to the Russian people. Like Reagan, like McCain, Vladimir had a way of speaking to ordinary people, even as he holds the highest public officials to account. And that's a legacy that he carries on certainly to this day. Vladimir said in that ceremony that he knew that one day the government of Russia would be proud to stand on a street named for a Russian patriot like Boris, and we certainly know that's true today. His optimism, his hope, that's what encourages so many of us here today. The unity that we've seen around calling for the release of all the prisoners of conscience in Russia. He would want us to take inspiration from their bravery of those pictured here. And I certainly can't speak for President Reagan, but I am sure that Vladimir and his bravery and his courage would inspire President Reagan as during his time, the bravery and courage of so many Soviet dissidents did. President Reagan's commitment to standing with those individual dissidents, to championing their causes, defined his leadership, and it certainly serves as an example for political leaders in the US today. One of President Reagan's most famous quotes about freedom was that it's never more than one generation away from extinction, that it is not ours by way of inheritance, but it must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. The people of Russia know that all too well. Their fight, Vladimir's fight, is so that one day his children may know a free Russia, that the children of Russia may know a free homeland. In that same speech, President Reagan said this: "Perhaps you and I have lived too long with this miracle to be properly appreciative. We certainly know that Vladimir appreciates the miracle of freedom, and we hope that one day he will know it again." Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to take a moment. We've heard from many folks who are Volodya's friends, colleagues, and I want to invite Eugenia to come back up to join me in just sharing. Vladimir has not been able to hear these words today. We hope that he will be able to read some of these words and the letters that come his way. But share with us a little bit of your reflection on how he would be, what advice he would be sharing with his friends, his colleagues, champions for all of those that are in prison today.
Thank you very much, Damon. And wow. You know, I know how humbled Vladimir would be if he stood here today. Because that is, I think, a very distinctive trait of Vladimir's character. He's humble. He's been spoken about as this great statesman, a revolutionary who brought the amazing instrument of the Magnitsky legislation to the world, who helped doing this. Like a prolific writer who knows and finds the right words to explain the difficult things. I think someone whose mentor was Boris Nemtsov, and who is always, forever will be proud to have had such a mentor. But Vladimir would be humbled, and he would be standing here all red in the face, you know, listening to your amazing words, to such warmth, to you speaking, to you remembering his sense of humor and the funny stories. Vladimir is nothing about the funny stories. He loves that. He loves. He doesn't like to make it heavy. You know, he appreciates the lightness of being. He loves life. And that is something that very well characterizes him. And I'm also very heartwarmed to hear all your support to my compatriots who are fighting against the regime, both inside and outside of the country. And you know, I was sitting here in the front row, in front of this thing, looking at these amazing faces. 3 of them are US citizens. 2 of these people are journalists. Also Kurmasheva and Evan Gershkovich. There's also Paul Whelan. There is Sasha Skochelenko on this side, I believe. She is the one who replaced price tags at a local supermarket with anti-war messages. Went to prison for 7 years for that. Look at her smile. She's standing in a cage, and she's smiling. Look at Ilya Yashin on this side. Ilya published posts and videos about war crimes committed by the Russian army in Ukraine. Went to prison for that, for spreading not only false information about the use of Russian armed forces in Ukraine. Ilya, if you read his texts about Russia, about his compatriots, about his hopes for the future, so contagious in the best way possible. There is Zarima Musaeva and Igor Baryshnikov. Igor Baryshnikov is an activist whose health is not well at all. Actually, it's failing behind bars. More than that, his 90-year-old mother, he was taking care of her, had been taking care of her before the imprisonment. After he was thrown in jail, she died without him, without a son by her side. And his health is failing behind bars. So it's the Russian regime basically killing 2 people at the same time for his anti-war position, for his refusal to stay silent in the face of the atrocities committed by the regime. There is also Alexei Gorinov. He's the municipal deputy, the Moscow municipal deputy, who during a council meeting in Moscow said it would be unethical to hold children's drawing and dancing contests while kids in Ukraine were being killed on a daily basis. Again, he went to prison for that for many years. And he's standing, what you can see he's holding in his hands. He wrote on a piece of paper, "Do you still need this war?" He's standing in a cage with that piece of paper so that everyone out there sees it. Lilia Chanisheva. Lilia Chanisheva was the head of the anti-corruption office, a young, talented, respected politician, very much appreciated in her region and very much loved. Her husband is advocating for her release. Her husband, whom she was torn away from, and they still want to have kids. They want to have a family. They want to raise their family in Russia, in a democratic, free country where their kids will not be indoctrinated in schools or mobilized and shipped off to Ukraine to die for the interests of some vile dictator. Maria Ponomarenko. Maria Ponomarenko is a journalist who made online posts about the theater bombing in Mariupol. During her pretrial detention, she spent a month in a so-called psychiatric hospital where she was injected with unknown substances, and when she was able to talk to her lawyers afterwards, she couldn't recollect 3 whole days of her so-called treatment because she was under the influence of substances that made her completely lose her conscience and her mind. Yegor Balazaykin. Yegor Balazaykin is a 17-year-old kid. 17-year-old. Vladimir's and my oldest daughter recently turned 18. She was with me at the US Embassy here in Washington. She stood for 3 hours in a huge line of Russian citizens who came to the to the Russian embassy here in Washington to say no to the regime during the action that was called Noon Against Putin. So Yegor is 17. He's a year younger. He was sentenced to 7 or 5 years in prison for a failed attempt to set a conscription center on fire. During his detention and during questioning, he said that he was against the war and he stood by his words. And so, yes, he was sentenced and sent to prison. There is no picture of Dasha Kozareva, an 18-year-old who is facing years in prison for posting lines from Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. Again, kids, families being broken up, loved ones being torn away from their loved ones. I don't know what Alexei Navalny's family is going through right now. I don't know how Yulia finds that strength to stand up and say the words that she does. I don't know how she does it, but I am so proud of being able to call these people my compatriots. And these are the people we are fighting for, and we will continue fighting for. Vladimir has been their voice for many years, because even before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, according to Memorial, Russia had over 300 political prisoners. Now that number grew tremendously. And now that Vladimir's behind bars, I will continue his work standing and fighting for these people, because these are the faces of that Russia that we all want to see. And I thank you for your unwavering support and solidarity in standing with me and making sure that their voices do not go silent. Thank you all very much.
The world knew the power of Vladimir's voice before he went to prison. They've only begun to understand the power of Eugenia's voice and how you have used it not just to advocate for him, not just for political prisoners in Russia, but I've seen you provide the support to those family members who have political prisoners around the world. Thank you for your leadership, Eugenia, in this cause. We're going to invite next one of the senators who has had perhaps one of the longest track records of support for democracy and freedom in the Senate. We're joined by Senator Dick Durbin, who is the Senate Majority Whip, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, serves on appropriations, but he's been a leader on so many of these issues, the chair and the founder of the Senate Ukraine Caucus, the Free Belarus Caucus, Senate Baltic Freedom Caucus, and a champion for Vladimir and political prisoners in Russia. Senator, please, the podium is yours.
What an honor it is to be here. I want to thank Senator Cardin for hosting this event. And Eugenia, I'm glad I made it to hear your speech. On behalf of your husband and your family, it's the reason I continue this effort. The cowardly 25-year sentence handed down to Vladimir from Putin's puppet court and the recent death of Alexei Navalny in Putin's gulag make it clear that this meeting is very timely. Vladimir came to see me 2 years ago before returning to Russia. He told me about his decision. He was unequivocal. He had to return. He wanted to, and believed in a better future for the Russian people, one in which so many talented people could live in a free society and at peace with their neighbors. It's a simple aspiration, really, and yet one so incredibly threatening to that despot, Putin, that he clings to power at all costs, even at the loss of countless lives in an utterly senseless and criminal war in Ukraine. Vladimir saw through the folly of Putin's narcissism and false patriotism, as did Alexei Navalny and so many others. After Kara-Murza's arrest, Senators Rubio, Shaheen, Tillis, and I joined in a letter to the administration urging that the Magnitsky Law sanctions apply, a law Vladimir so eloquently advocated for. He applied to those in his arrest. I know Senators Menendez and Risch also joined in our request. I'm glad the administration took exactly that step. Yesterday, Senators Kane, King, and myself joined to introduce a resolution condemning Russia's hostage-taking of American citizens, as well as U.S. permanent resident Kara-Murza, and urging they be designated as wrongfully detained. Incredibly, or for those who have met him, not surprisingly, Vladimir has continued to write his column for the Washington Post from prison. I've read it. I'm sure many have here. I want to quote from one piece that he wrote. Quote, "The prisoner's worst nightmare is the thought of being forgotten." I would often quote this line passed on by Irwin Cotler, a towering figure in human rights, former Justice Minister of Canada, and international lawyer for the prisoners of conscience, including Andrei Sakharov, Natan Sharansky, and Nelson Mandela. "I always knew how true those words were," your husband wrote, "and how important they were to the international campaigns of solidarity with prisoners of conscience. I now feel it with my own skin." Well, let me say clearly and loudly here among so many who admire Vladimir, you will not be forgotten. We will continue to work for your release and your vision of a more open and peaceful Russia. In July of 1911, a ship landed in the Baltimore harbor from Germany. On that ship were my grandmother, my mother, aunt, and uncle, coming from Lithuania to the United States of America. My grandmother carried with her a few things that survive to this day. One was a Roman Catholic prayer book written in Lithuanian, which had been banned by the Tsar in Russia. That simple woman, who I never knew, had the guts to put that prayer book in her suitcase and bring it to the United States. I have it upstairs in my desk in the Capitol. It's a reminder to me that freedom is worth fighting for, even taking great risks. That's my family story. There are thousands just like it, maybe more. And they indicate to all of us who have been blessed with freedom from birth without really earning it, that there are people who are willing to fight for it and are willing to sacrifice. The sacrifice which Vladimir is making is a grave sacrifice, and your family as well, standing behind him at this moment. We can do no less but to stand by your side and to let you know and your children know and your family and friends know Vladimir is not alone and Vladimir will not be forgotten. Thank you.